It took me 35 years of breathing heavy industrial welding fumes, 35 years of feeling hot slag burn deep into the meat of my forearms, and a lifetime of burying the quiet ache of losing my sweet Mary beneath the frozen soil of Colorado to realize a bitter truth: most men die before they ever learn. Blood does not make a family. Blood only supplies the veins. Sometimes, the very children you would take a bullet for are just wolves waiting for you to grow old enough, tired enough, and soft enough so they can tear you apart for the scraps in your pocket. Welcome back to Dad's Ultimate Payback. If you have ever spent your youth breaking your back, working double shifts in the dead of winter to build a roof over your family's head, only to watch your own flesh and blood strike a match and burn it down just to warm their hands for a single night, then pull up a chair and listen closely. This story was written for you. My name is Arthur Art Vance. I am 64 years old. To the rest of the world, I am just an old ironworker from Pueblo, Colorado, a man whose skin smells permanently of motor oil, hot iron, and pine pitch. A man who speaks only when spoken to and wears clothes that have seen more hard labor than 1,000 city folk will see in 5 lifetimes. But what my son did not know, what none of them knew, was that behind the scars on my hands lay a debt that was about to come due. And I am a man who has never missed a single payment in his life. The snow came down hard over Aspen that Thursday evening in mid-December. It wasn't the soft, gentle dust you see on postcards sent home to tourists in California. It was the heavy, blinding, razor-sharp mountain snow that cuts right through heavy canvas and settles deep into your bones. The wind roared off the peaks, howling through the towering blue spruces like a grieving woman, whipping the icy flakes into blinding white sheets across the winding mountain roads. I turned off my ancient 1998 Ford F-250, a truck that had carried me through 2 decades of hard winters, 3 sets of tires, and 100,000 miles of hauling steel, and let the engine die. Through the sweeping arc of the windshield wipers, I looked up at the fortress sitting on the crest of Red Mountain, $18 million of glass, imported Italian slate, and warm cedar timber. Nestled high above the valley floor, the house sat like an imperial palace. Parking in the heated driveway were row upon row of German luxury sedans, low-slung Italian sports cars, and heavy black SUVs with dark-tinted windows. Valets in matching black parkas ran back and forth through the swirling snow, holding giant black umbrellas over women wrapped in $1,000 mink coats and men wearing suits that cost more than I used to make in 2 months of welding bridge girders over the Arkansas River. I sat there in the dark cab for 11 full minutes. My hands rested flat against the steering wheel. Big hands, calloused, heavy. Hands that knew how to shape raw iron with a 12-pound sledge. Hands that knew how to hold a dying woman's palm so gently she didn't feel the chill creeping into her fingers. I looked down at the passenger seat. Sitting beside me in the dim glow of the dashboard light was a small box. I had carved it myself out of a solid block of reclaimed white oak taken from the floorboards of my grandfather's original blacksmith shop down in Huerfano County. It had taken me 3 months of quiet evenings after my long shifts at the shop to carve it. The wood was smooth as polished glass, rubbed down with raw linseed oil until it glowed with a deep golden amber light. Inside that wooden box lay 2 things. The first was a solid gold pocket watch, an Illinois Watch Company timepiece handed down from my grandfather to my father, and from my father to me. The face was pristine porcelain, etched with delicate black Roman numerals, its mechanical heart ticking with the steady, quiet rhythm of a time when a man's word was his bond. It was the only heirloom my family possessed. The second item lying beside the watch was a crisp, neatly bound savings ledger from First National Bank, $150,000. Every cent of it had been earned on weekend shifts, midnight emergency call-outs to repair cracked boiler pipes in frozen factories, and 6-month stretches of skip meals so I could put money aside. I didn't save that money for a new truck. I didn't save it for a golf trip or a retirement home in Florida. I saved it for Julian. Because no matter how cold he became, no matter how distant he grew after he moved up to Aspen, he was still my son. He was the boy I used to carry on my shoulders through the high clover fields behind our old farmhouse, when the summer sun was warm and Mary was still alive, laughing at us from the porch. I tucked the wooden box inside the inner breast pocket of my heavy, brown Carhartt duck canvas jacket. It was an old jacket, stiffened by years of sweat, rain, and diesel exhaust, but it was clean. I had washed it twice in baking soda to get the heavy scent of the workshop out of the fabric, and I had shined my work boots with black tallow until the worn leather gleamed beneath the streetlights. I stepped out of the truck, the freezing mountain air hitting my lungs like a mouthful of crushed glass, and walked toward the iron gates of the estate. The double oak doors of the mansion swung open, releasing a wave of hot, perfumed air that smelled of expensive cologne, roasted prime rib, and burning eucalyptus wood. Inside, the grand foyer stretched out beneath a chandelier made of hand-blown glass that hung like a frozen waterfall from a 30-foot vaulted ceiling. 60 people, the elite of Denver and Aspen financial circles, investment bankers, real estate moguls, and local politicians, stood in clusters across a floor made of pale, polished marble so smooth you could see the reflection of the snow falling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. I stepped over the threshold, taking off my old Stetson hat, holding it respectfully in my left hand while my right hand instinctively went to my breast pocket to feel the solid weight of the oak box against my ribs. The snow on my boots melted immediately against the heated marble floor, leaving 2 small, dark puddles near the wool welcome mat. Within 4 seconds, the room went quiet. It started near the mahogany bar, where 2 men in bespoke tuxedos stopped mid-sentence, their glass tumblers of single malt scotch hovering halfway to their lips. The silence spread like oil over calm water. One by one, heads turned. Eyes slid over my thick flannel shirt, my faded denim jeans, my heavy brass belt buckle, and the dark, callous skin of my neck. Then came Chloe. She descended the floating glass staircase like a swan made of ice. Chloe Montgomery Vance, 29 years old, slender, wrapped in a floor-length emerald green silk gown that rustled against the marble with every step she took. Her blonde hair was pinned back with diamond clips, her lips painted a sharp, violent crimson. She was the daughter of the Montgomery family, old Denver real estate money that had gone sour beneath a mountain of debt, though you would never know it from the way she held her chin in the air. She didn't smile when she saw me. Her eyes narrowed into 2 thin slits of pure, unadulterated disgust. She walked across the marble floor, her 5-inch silver stilettos clicking like small hammers against the stone. The crowd parted for her, watching with quiet, eager anticipation. In Aspen, nothing entertained the wealthy quite like the public execution of a poor man's dignity. "Arthur," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in that dead silent room it carried to every corner. It was a voice coated in artificial sugar and sharp steel. "What are you doing here? Hello?" "Chloe," I said quietly. My voice was deep, gravelly, honed by decades of breathing dust and shouting over the roar of heavy machinery. "I came for Julian. I heard about the promotion to managing partner at Vance & Sterling. I brought something for him." Chloe stopped 3 feet away from me. She didn't look at my face. Her eyes lingered on the wet spots on the marble floor where my boots had stood, then moved slowly up my canvas coat, lingering on a small grease stain near the cuff that 30 years of washing couldn't quite erase. She took a step back, reaching into her beaded evening bag, pulling out a small lace handkerchief, and holding it delicately over her nose. "You brought something?" she sneered, her voice dropping into an octave of pure, dripping condescension. "Arthur, look at you. You look like you just crawled out from under a broken tractor in Pueblo. This is a $500 a ticket private celebration for the managing partners of the largest venture capital firm in the state. The mayor of Denver is standing 20 feet away from you." She gestured toward the crowd with her manicured hand, her heavy diamond rings catching the light of the chandelier. "Do you have any idea how much effort I put into making sure this evening was flawless? And you walk in here smelling like diesel fuel, hot iron, and cheap laundry soap. You're ruining the air in this room just by standing in it." A quiet, cruel chuckle rippled through the guests nearby. A young analyst in a velvet tuxedo jacket leaned toward his date and whispered something behind his hand. She giggled, covering her mouth with her champagne glass. I didn't flinch. I didn't lower my eyes. I reached into my breast pocket, pulled out the hand-carved oak box, and held it out with both hands. "I came to see my son, Chloe," as I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat, perfectly steady. "This belonged to my grandfather, and there's something inside it that took me a long time to save. Please, give it to Julian." Chloe looked down at the wooden box. Her lip curled as if I were offering her a handful of live earthworms. "A wooden box?" she said, raising her voice so the whole room could hear. "What is this, Arthur? Some rustic folk craft from the valley? Did you whittle this while sitting on an oil drum?" She reached out, her long acrylic nails clicking against the polished oak lid, and flipped the box open. Inside, the gold pocket watch caught the chandelier light, its inner gears ticking silently, surrounded by the crisp blue paper of the First National Bank savings ledger. Chloe reached in with 2 fingers, picking up the gold watch by its heavy fob chain. She held it up into the air, dangling it like a piece of dead bait before the crowd. "A pocket watch," she laughed, a high, mocking sound that cut through the warm air like a whip. "An old, rusty, mechanical pocket watch. Look at this, everyone. Arthur brought us a relic from the 19th century. What are we supposed to do with this, Arthur? Pawn it to pay for the catering? The smell of oil on this cheap brass is making me nauseous." Engagement break interlocking CTA. "Before I tell you what she did next, let me ask you a question. If you were standing in my boots, holding the only memory of your father while a stranger mocked your lifelong sweat in front of 60 people, would you lose your temper right then and there, or would you stay quiet and let them walk deeper into the trap? Leave a comment down below with A for immediate fight, or B for silent revenge. And drop the name of your city or state so I know where our community of quiet fathers is watching from tonight. She looked me straight in the eyes, her blue eyes cold, empty, and devoid of a single drop of human kindness. And then she did something that made the air freeze in my throat. She didn't drop the watch back into the box. She turned her wrist slightly, holding a crystal flute of vintage 1996 Dom Perignon champagne in her other hand. With a slow, deliberate motion, she tilted the glass. A stream of pale, bubbling, expensive golden wine poured directly over my grandfather's oak box. It filled the velvet lining, soaking into the pristine paper of the $150,000 savings ledger, drowning the mechanical gears of the watch in sticky, acidic alcohol. "Oops," Chloe whispered. There was no apology in her face, only a wicked, triumphant spark. My hand slipped. Before I could move, before I could even take a breath, she released her fingers. The gold watch fell. It dropped 5 feet through the air, hitting the polished marble floor with a sharp, sickening metallic crack. The glass crystal shattered into 100 glittering slivers that scattered across the stone floor like crushed ice. The tiny golden balance wheel snapped out of its housing, bouncing twice before rolling to a stop against the toe of Chloe's silver stiletto. She didn't look down. Instead, she took one step forward, bringing her heavy silver heel down directly on top of the open porcelain face of my grandfather's watch. The sound echoed through the silent foyer. Porcelain, gold, and fine steel gears were ground into fine, useless dust beneath the heel of her shoe. My heart didn't race. My blood didn't boil. Something far colder, far deeper took hold of me. It was the feeling a man gets when he's standing in the dark, watching a fire take his barn, knowing there isn't enough water in the well to save it. You don't scream at the flames. You just watch them burn, and you remember where the wind was blowing from. Then the crowd shifted. Julian stepped through the circle of guests, 32 years old, my boy. The boy I had spent 8 hours a day teaching how to throw a baseball in the backyard until my hands were too sore to grip a fork. The boy whose fever I had cooled with wet towels when he had the croup at 4 in the morning, weeping over his bed because I couldn't afford a private doctor. He looked sharp. A midnight blue tuxedo made of Italian wool, his hair slicked back with expensive pomade, a gold Rolex gleaming on his left wrist. But his face was pale. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his cheeks were jumping. He didn't look at the shattered watch on the floor. He didn't look at the champagne dripping from the wooden box still held in my left hand. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated shame. "Julian," I said softly. "Shut up, Dad," Julian said. His voice was low, tight, and sharp as a razor. He took 3 fast steps toward me. He didn't look at the guests watching him. He reached down, snatched the champagne-soaked bank ledger out of the wooden box in my hands, and looked at the front cover. He saw the numbers written in blue ink. $150,000. Julian laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was an ugly, bitter sneer. He threw the wet ledger onto the marble floor, right next to the crushed pieces of his great-grandfather's watch, and brought his leather dress shoe down on top of it, grinding the wet paper into the puddle of melted snow and champagne. $150,000? Julian hissed, stepping closer until his face was 6 inches from mine. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "Is this a joke to you? Do you think this makes you a good father? You've embarrassed me every single day of my life. You spent 30 years dragging grease into our house, wearing those disgusting Carhartt jackets, making sure everyone in town knew my father was just a dirt-poor welder who worked in a ditch." He gestured wildly toward the room, his voice rising, shedding every last bit of his refined, high society polish, revealing the ugly, desperate boy beneath. "Look around you, Dad. Look at these people. My partners make more money in an afternoon than you made in 5 years of sweating over your hot steel. I spent 10 years erasing your name from my resume. I spent 10 years making sure people in Denver thought I came from money, and you walk into my celebration wearing work boots and carrying a wet piece of paper." "Julian," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the roaring wind outside the heavy front doors. "I built that money dollar by dollar, working night shifts so you could go to college without a dime of debt." "Then sell the shop," Julian shouted, his eyes flashing with a wild, desperate greed that sent a cold shudder straight through my spine. "Sell that miserable, rusting piece of trash ironworks in Pueblo. Sell the land, sell your tools, sell everything you own, and give the money to me and Chloe. We're buying a penthouse on the Upper East Side in New York next month. We need $3 million for the down payment, and we need it in our names." He jabbed a finger hard against my chest, right over my heart, pushing me back a step. "You're 64 years old, Dad. You don't need a house. You don't need a workshop. You can sell that dump, sign every last dollar over to us, and you can move into the small storage room behind our garage in Denver. It's got a concrete floor, it's dry, and it's got power. At your age, with your background, you should be grateful for any shelter you can get. You ought to be thanking us for offering you a place to sleep." Chloe stepped up beside him, slipping her arm through his, resting her chin on his shoulder as she looked at me over her silver sunglasses. "He's right, Arthur," she said softly, her lips curving into a victorious smile. "You've lived your life in the dirt. It's time you step aside and let people who actually know how to use wealth take control of it. Sign the papers, go back to Pueblo, pack your bags, and wait until we call you." Silence settled over the grand foyer once again. 60 wealthy men and women stood in their fine clothes, holding their champagne glasses, watching an old man in a stained canvas coat stand before his son. Some looked amused, some looked bored. Not a single person in that room stepped forward. Not a single person said a word. I stood there for a long time. The champagne was still dripping off the corners of my grandfather's oak box, dropping onto the toes of my shined work boots. Thump, thump, thump. Like the slow counting down of a clock that had finally run out of time. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't curse them. Nor did I shed a single tear. My mother used to tell me that when a man is truly hurt, he makes a lot of noise. But when a man is done, he goes quiet as the grave. I slowly knelt down on the cold marble floor. My knee joints popped in the quiet room, a sound born of 35 years of kneeling on cold steel plates and concrete shop floors. I picked up the larger pieces of my grandfather's shattered watch. I gathered the tiny gold gears, the bent hands, and the crushed porcelain face, holding them carefully in the palm of my right hand. I picked up the wet, torn pages of the bank ledger, folded them neatly, and placed them back inside the wooden box. I stood up slowly, my back straight, my shoulders square. I looked Julian straight in the eyes. I looked past the midnight blue tuxedo, past the Rolex, past the arrogance in his face, and for the first time in 32 years I saw him clearly. He wasn't my son anymore. He was just a stranger who shared my last name. I reached out, brushed a small fleck of wet snow off the collar of my canvas coat, and looked at him with a soft, sad, lingering smile. "Thank you, Julian," I said softly. My voice was calm, clear, and steady as an anvil. "Thank you for showing me exactly what 35 years of my life were worth to you." Julian frowned, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer him. I placed my Stetson hat back on my head, pulled the brim down low over my eyes to block out the harsh light of the chandelier, tucked the wooden box under my arm, and turned my back on them. I walked out the double oak doors, stepping back into the freezing Colorado night. The mountain wind howled across the driveway, driving the sharp white snow against my face, but I didn't feel the cold. As I unlocked the door of my old Ford truck and sat down in the dark cab, listening to the heavy V8 engine rumble to life, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I pressed a single button on the screen. A quiet beep sounded through the cab, indicating that the high-definition audio recording application, the one that had been running from the second I stepped out of my truck, had successfully saved the file to a secure cloud server. I looked up through the snow-streaked window at the glowing windows of the $18 million mansion on the hill. "Julian," I whispered to the empty truck cab, my voice cold as the ice forming on the windshield. "You asked me to sell the shop. You asked me to give you everything I built. But you forgot one little thing. You forgot to ask who actually owns the land beneath your feet." I shifted the truck into drive, stepped on the gas, and let the red taillights of my old Ford fade into the blinding white storm, leaving Red Mountain behind me in the dark. The 2-hour drive south from the glitz and fake smiles of Aspen down into Pueblo, Colorado, is a descent from a painted paradise into the hard, unyielding reality of stone, cold riverbeds, and rusted iron. Up on Red Mountain, the snow was made for tourists to slide over on $3,000 skis. Down in Pueblo, the snow settled heavy and dark over the industrial yards, grayed by the soot of diesel chimneys and the thick smoke of heavy furnaces. I pulled my old Ford F-250 through the chain-link gates of Vance Ironworks at 4:30 in the morning. The tires crunched over the frozen gravel of a yard that had been my sanctuary, my church, and my prison for 35 years. High above the entrance hung the heavy wrought iron sign I had shaped with my own 2 hands when Mary was still pregnant with Julian. 2 crossed hammers over an anvil, weathered by time, pitted by hail, but standing straight and true. I stepped out of the truck, shutting the heavy steel door behind me. The silence here was different. In Aspen, the quiet was tense, suffocating, filled with the unspoken judgments of people who measured your worth by the brand of your coat or the year of your car. Here in Pueblo, the silence was honest. It tasted of cold grease, iron dust, dried pine shavings, and coal fire. It was the smell of honest sweat, the kind of sweat that doesn't ask for a round of applause. I unlocked the side door of the main shop, stepped inside, and hit the breaker box. 3 rows of high overhead sodium lights flickered, roared softly, and bathed the 2,000-square-foot workshop in a warm amber glow. To anyone passing by on Highway 50, Vance Ironworks looked like a dying relic of an industrial age that America had left behind. They saw a weathered steel building with corrugated metal siding, 3 rusting crane booms sitting in the yard, 2 old welding rigs parked beneath a lean-to, and an old man in a canvas coat working long after sunset to fix broken tractor hitches for local alfalfa farmers. Julian had looked at this place for 15 years with nothing but pure, unadulterated shame. To him it was a tomb of grease and poverty, a place he scrubbed off his skin before driving up to his marble mansion in Aspen. What Julian never bothered to learn, what he was too blind with arrogance to ever discover, was that a man who knows how to shape iron also knows how to build something that lasts far beyond the life of a single furnace. I walked past the heavy South Bend lathe, past the gas forge glowing faintly with dying embers from yesterday's work, and stepped into my small back office. It was a simple room with cypress paneling, an old steel desk bought from an Army surplus auction in 1984, a potbelly stove purring in the corner, and a framed photograph of Mary sitting beside my brass desk lamp. She was 24 in that picture, sitting on the hood of my first work truck wearing a yellow sundress, her dark hair blowing across her face as she laughed at something stupid I had said behind the lens. I sat down in my leather swivel chair, set my grandfather's wet oak box on the desk, and leaned back. The champagne was still sticky on my hands, smelling of cheap fermentation. I picked up my phone, dialed a 17-digit secure access code, and pressed it to my ear. "Good morning, Arthur." A calm, measured voice answered on the second ring. It was Marcus Vance, no relation to me, but the senior wealth manager at Northern Trust in Denver. "I saw the automated notification that you logged into the portal at 4 in the morning. Is everything all right?" "The storm cleared, Marcus," I said, my voice low, gravelly, vibrating through the quiet office. "It's time to look at the books." "Very well," Marcus replied, the sound of keys clicking softly in the background. "Where would you like to begin?" "Read me the valuation on the Pueblo acreage first," I said. "The 200 acres surrounding the shop were formally appraised last Tuesday by the State Economic Development Council," Marcus said smoothly. "Because the land sits directly over the high-capacity fiber optic trunk line running along the interstate, and because of your private water rights from the Arkansas River Basin, the state has finalized the zoning for the Southern Colorado AI Data Center Hub. The formal purchase offer from the tech consortium stands at $45 million, Arthur, unencumbered, fully titled in your name. $45 million, not a single cent of it came from speculation, Wall Street gambling, or flipping houses. It came from 35 years of buying 5-acre parcels of arid, rocky scrubland whenever I had $50 extra in my pocket, paying the property taxes year after year while other men spent their money on fancy boats and trips to Las Vegas." "And the trust?" I asked quietly, looking at Mary's picture on the desk. "The Mary Vance Trust holds a 40% limited partnership stake in Vance and Sterling Venture Capital." Marcus read from his screen. "When your son Julian and his partner established the firm 6 years ago, your silent capital infusion of $12 million was what allowed them to lease their offices in Aspen and Denver. Under the terms of the trust agreement, you hold exclusive voting control over capital calls, asset liquidation, and debt restructuring. Julian believes his partner provided that seed capital through an offshore angel group. He has no idea the money belongs to his mother's estate." I looked down at my hands. These were the hands that Julian had called disgusting in front of 60 people. Hands that had wiped sweat off my forehead while I bled over a welding rig so my son could wear $3,000 Italian suits and drink scotch with mayors and bankers. "Keep the trust quiet for 48 hours, Marcus," I said softly. "Let them feel like they're standing on solid ground a little while longer." "Understood, Mr. Vance," Marcus replied, standing by. I hung up the phone and looked out the office window. The morning sun was just beginning to break over the eastern plains, turning the snow on the iron yard into a sheet of glittering gold. Julian thought I was a poor old fool who had nothing left to give. He thought he was robbing a defenseless old man. He didn't know he was standing in the shadow of a mountain that was about to collapse on top of his head. At 7:15 that morning, the mail slot on the front workshop door rattled. A single heavy manila envelope dropped onto the floorboards. I walked out, picked it up, and saw the return address in the upper left corner. First National Bank of Colorado, Commercial Lending Division. It was marked urgent, second noter. I carried it back to my desk, took out my pocket knife, and sliced the top edge open. Inside was a 16-page document bound in blue paper. I spread it flat across my desk, right beside Mary's photograph, and began to read line by line. The way a welder inspects a structural seam before hoisting a bridge beam into the air. It was a co-signer confirmation letter and an asset pledge agreement for a commercial line of credit totaling $2.2 million. My name, Arthur L. Vance, was listed as the primary guarantor. The collateral pledged against the loan was the deed to my workshop, the 200 acres of land in Pueblo, and the small 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Aspen that I had bought for Mary before she passed away. I flipped to the signature page at the back. There it was, Arthur L. Vance, written in black ink. It looked like my handwriting at first glance. The heavy slope of the A, the long, deliberate tail on the V. But a man who has spent 35 years marking steel with a soapstone marker knows every muscle in his hand. The in Arthur was too smooth. I write my ers with a Sharps squared top because my knuckles are stiff from arthritis. This signature had been written by someone whose hand was young, fast, and unburdened by hard labor. My hands didn't shake. They went completely still, the kind of stillness that comes over a hunter when he sees a predator step out of the tree line into his clearing. I remembered last October. Julian had come down to the shop, one of the 3 times he visited me in 5 years. He had brought 2 cups of coffee, sat at this very desk, and offered to help me organize my annual property tax exemptions. He had sat there for an hour, chatting about his golf game, sliding forms back and forth across the blotter while I went into the back bay to grab us a pair of clean mugs. I had been gone for 20 minutes, long enough to take high-resolution photographs of my deed, my tax returns, my social security card, and to practice my signature on a pad of yellow legal paper until it looked close enough to pass a notary's quick glance. I picked up the phone, dialed the number on the letterhead, and asked for the senior risk officer. "Mr. Vance," the officer said after confirming my identity. "We received the executed notarized agreement 5 weeks ago. The funds, $2.2 million, were wired directly to Montgomery Luxury Holdings LLC per the disbursement instructions attached by your daughter-in-law, Chloe Montgomery Vance." "Chloe Montgomery Vance," I repeated. My voice was completely flat, drained of any emotion. "Yes, sir." She indicated the funds were being used to acquire a 30% stake in an online luxury apparel house. "Is there a problem, Mr. Vance?" "The first interest payment of $42,000 is due this Friday. If it is defaulted, the bank will initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings against the Pueblo property and the Aspen residence." "Thank you for the information," I said quietly. "You will be receiving a formal notice from my legal counsel before noon today." I hung up, put the letter in my coat pocket, and drove my truck up to the Aspen house, the small, 2-bedroom cedar home on the edge of town where Mary had spent her last good summers watching the elk cross the meadow behind the fence. I pulled into the driveway at 10:30. The snow had stopped, leaving a blinding white blanket over the yard. But something was wrong. There was a commercial van parked near the porch, a white van with the words Apex Lock and Security painted on the side. I stepped out of my truck, my work boots sinking into the snow, and walked up the front steps. Standing on the porch was a young man with a tool belt around his waist, holding a power drill, working on the front door handle. Beside him stood Chloe. She was wearing an oversized beige cashmere coat, dark designer sunglasses, and holding a cup of Starbucks coffee in one hand while her phone was propped against her ear with her shoulder. She paused her conversation when she heard my boots on the steps, lowered her phone, and looked at me with a cold, triumphant sneer that made my stomach turn into ice. "What are you doing here, Arthur?" she asked, not even bothering to take off her sunglasses. "This is my house, Chloe," I said, stopping at the top step. "What is that man doing to my lock?" Chloe took a slow sip of her coffee, her gold bracelets clinking against the cup. "Correction, Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with venomous pleasure. "This house is now under the administrative control of Montgomery Luxury Holdings. Under the terms of the commercial guarantee you signed last month, the property management rights were transferred to my family's asset firm. The locks are being changed today. I never signed a transfer," I said quietly. Chloe let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping over concrete. "Oh, please, spare me the old man amnesia story. Julian handled the paperwork. You signed it, you stamped it, and now it's ours. We need this house cleared out by tomorrow afternoon. We're staging it for an immediate private sale to cover our corporate expansion." She pointed her long, manicured finger toward the side of the porch. Stacking against the snow-covered railing were 4 cardboard boxes. I looked closer, and my breath caught in my throat. One box was split open on the side. Sitting in the snow was Mary's porcelain tea set, the one her mother had brought over from Ireland in 1952. Beside it lay Mary's hand-embroidered winter quilt, the one she had spent 3 winters stitching while she sat by the fireplace, its edges dragged through the dirty slush left by the locksmith's boots. "Your junk is in those boxes," Chloe said casually, checking her fingernails. "Take what you can fit in the back of your rusty truck and get out. If you're still on this property in 20 minutes, I'm calling the Pitkin County Sheriff and having you removed for criminal trespassing. Go back to your trash heap in Pueblo, Arthur. You don't belong in Aspen anymore." The locksmith looked at me, then looked down at his drill. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, sensing the ugly, poisonous air hanging between us. I didn't yell. I didn't reach for Chloe. I didn't grab the front collar of her cashmere coat and throw her into the snowbank. Though every muscle in my 64-year-old arms screamed to tear that porch down to its foundation, I knelt down in the snow, I picked up Mary's porcelain teapot, gently brushing the dirt and icy slush off the hand-painted blue roses on its side. I picked up her quilt, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the dryest box. I carried the 4 boxes, one by one, to the back of my truck, placing them neatly beneath the canvas bed cover to keep them dry. When I finished, I walked back to the edge of the porch, stood 2 feet from Chloe, and looked down at her through the dark lenses of her glasses. "Chloe," I said softly. "What?" she snapped, stepping back half an inch. "A lock only keeps out an honest man," I said, my voice steady as an anvil. "A thief always thinks the house belongs to them until the real owner comes home with the key." She opened her mouth to spit another insult, but something in my eyes, something old, cold, and dark as a frozen lake, made her stop. Her lips tightened into a thin, pale line, and she turned her back on me, stepping inside my house and slamming my own front door in my face. Engagement break, interlocking CTA. If you were standing on that porch, watching a stranger throw your late wife's memories into the freezing slush while stealing the roof over your head, would you lose your mind and break that door down right then and there? Or would you step back, let the law take its course, and prepare a trap they could never escape from? Drop a comment down below with A for instant confrontation, or B for calculated silent justice, and tell me what city or state you are watching from today. I read every single one of your words. I didn't drive back to Pueblo. I drove straight into downtown Denver, parking my truck beneath the soaring glass towers of 17th Street. 20 minutes later, I was sitting on the 32nd floor of the First National Bank building, inside a corner office with dark walnut bookshelves, leather armchairs, and a sweeping view of the snow-covered Front Range Mountains. Sitting across from me was Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was 58 years old, with sharp silver hair cut into a precise bob, wearing a dark navy tailored suit. She was a former assistant United States attorney for the District of Colorado who had spent 15 years prosecuting white-collar bank fraud and organized crime syndicates before opening her own private practice. More importantly, she was Mary's closest friend from their college days at Colorado State. She was the woman who had sat beside Mary's hospital bed during those final terrifying weeks when the cancer had taken hold of her lungs. Sarah sat with her hands folded over a thick red legal folder, her dark eyes fixed on the forged loan documents I had laid out on her desk. "This signature is a complete amateur job, Art," Sarah said, her voice crisp, authoritative, and completely devoid of doubt. "I've seen better handwriting work from high school kids forging hall passes. A simple handwriting expert analysis will destroy this in a court of law within 48 hours. How fast can we move, Sarah?" I asked, leaning forward, resting my hands on my knees. "We don't just move fast, Art. We drop a mountain on them," Sarah said, opening her laptop and pulling up a series of legal filings. "Here is what we are executing immediately." She began counting off on her fingers with the cold precision of a military general mapping out a winter campaign. "First, we file an immediate emergency fraud report with the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That legally freezes the $2.2 million line of credit at First National Bank. Chloe won't be able to spend another single dime of that money, and the bank's fraud division will open a criminal investigation into Montgomery Luxury Holdings by tomorrow morning." "Good," I said quietly. "Second," Sarah continued, her eyes flashing with a cold, fierce light. "Colorado is a one-party consent state under Title 18 of the Colorado Revised Statutes. That means you are legally permitted to record any conversation you are a part of, anywhere at any time, without notifying the other party. I'm having my IT director install an encrypted, military-grade recording application on your phone right now. It runs completely silent in the background, uploads in real time to a cloud server I control, and cannot be deleted even if someone destroys the physical phone." She paused, looking at me with deep concern in her eyes. "Third, Art, what about the trust, the Mary Vance Trust?" "It's time, Sarah," I said, looking out the high window at the mountains. "Issue a formal demand letter to the board of Vance and Sterling Venture Capital. Request a full, unannounced forensic audit of all operational accounts, capital disbursements, and partner draw accounts, effective at 9 o'clock this Friday morning. Cite Section 402 of the Limited Partnership Act." Sarah let out a slow, quiet breath, a razor-sharp smile spreading across her face. "A forensic audit on a Friday morning before their major winter investor gala?" she asked. "Art, that will paralyze their entire firm. Julian won't be able to move $1,000 without a federal auditor standing over his shoulder. He wanted to see how wealth works, Sarah," I said, my voice low and dark. "I'm just giving him a front row seat." By 6 o'clock that Thursday evening, I was back inside Vance Ironworks in Pueblo. I knew how Julian's mind worked. He was panicked. He knew the bank loan had a Friday payment deadline, and he knew I had seen the forged papers. A desperate man doesn't think 3 steps ahead. He goes back to the place where he thinks the evidence is hidden. He knew I kept my original property deeds, tax records, and Mary's old personal journals inside the heavy, Antique steel safe in my back office. He was coming to the shop. I knew it as surely as I knew the sun would rise over the plains tomorrow. I didn't buy a gun. I didn't hire security guards. I used 35 years of industrial shop knowledge instead. I walked into the chemical storage room at the back of the shop and pulled a heavy black plastic jug off the top shelf. The label read Lumamark Industrial Tracer Solution. It was a specialized, proprietary chemical compound used by pipeline inspectors to detect microscopic hairline cracks in underground gas mains. It is completely odorless, completely colorless, and completely invisible to the naked human eye under normal lighting. But when it touches human skin, natural oils, or fabric, it binds instantaneously at a molecular level. It cannot be washed off with soap, bleach, industrial solvents, or alcohol for 72 hours. And under a standard ultraviolet blacklight, it glows with a blinding neon green radiance that can be seen from 50 feet away. I put on my rubber work gloves, took a fine horsehair brush, and carefully painted a thin, invisible layer of the tracer liquid across the entire surface of my steel safe, the brass handle of the office door, the drawer pulls of my desk, and the iron gate latch at the front of the yard. To the naked eye, everything looked dry, old, and dusty. Just another rusting office in an old iron shop. At 8:30, I parked my truck around the corner behind an abandoned grain elevator, walked back to the shop through the dark alley, and slipped into the small mezzanine storage loft directly above the office. I sat down on a pile of clean canvas drop cloths in the dark, pulled out my phone, confirmed the silent recording application was running, and waited. At 9:42, the metallic screech of the front gate handle echoed through the dark shop footsteps. 3 sets of shoes moving quietly across the concrete floor. I looked down through the small wooden slats of the loft floor. Standing in the amber glow of the emergency exit light were Julian, Chloe, and an older woman wrapped in a heavy mink coat, Victoria Montgomery, Chloe's mother. Victoria was 58 years old, a tall, gaunt woman with sharp, bony features, pulled back blonde hair, and a mouth that looked like it had never smiled a genuine smile in its entire life. Julian was holding a heavy crowbar and a flashlight, his hands trembling so hard the light beam bounced wildly across the steel beams overhead. "Hurry up, Julian!" Chloe hissed in a furious whisper, looking around the dark shop with pure disgust. "This place smells like a junkyard. If my coat touches any of this rust, I'm throwing it away." "Shut up, Chloe," Julian whispered back, his voice tight with sheer panic. "The key to the old safe should be in his desk drawer. If we can get the original 1988 property deeds and the physical land title, we can file an emergency quiet title claim in Pueblo County before his lawyer files the fraud injunction tomorrow morning." They moved into the back office. Through the slats in the floor directly above them, I watched Julian grab the brass handle of the office door with his bare hands. He pulled open my desk drawers, his fingers digging through the papers, gripping the metal handles, grabbing the steel dial of the heavy safe in the corner. Every single place his hands touched. The invisible, chemical tracer bound deep into his skin, soaking into his pores, staining his palms, his wrists, and the cuffs of his white silk shirt. Chloe stepped into the office, leaning her hands heavily against the edge of my desk, her expensive diamond rings scraping over the invisible liquid I had painted across the wood. "Did you find the deeds?" Victoria asked, standing in the doorway, crossing her arms over her mink coat. Her voice was cold, calculating, and completely devoid of any warmth. "Not yet," Julian said, sweating profusely now, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand, smearing the invisible tracer compound directly across his face and hairline. "The safe is locked. I need the key." "Then use the crowbar, you idiot," Victoria snapped softly. "We don't have time for this, Julian. The bank's fraud division called my house 20 minutes ago. They're freezing the Montgomery luxury accounts at midnight." Julian paused, leaning against the safe, breathing heavily. "Mom, what if he goes to the police? What if my father actually presses federal fraud charges against us? I could go to prison for 15 years. Then came the moment that made the blood in my veins turn into solid, jagged ice. Victoria let out a cold, sharp sneer, stepping closer to Julian, her voice dropping into a vicious, quiet hiss that carried up through the floorboards as clearly as if she were standing right beside me. "Stop being such a coward, Julian," Victoria said, shaking her head with disgust. "Your father is an uneducated old welder who lives in the dirt. Who do you think a judge in Aspen is going to believe? You, a managing partner at a venture firm, or an old man who smells like diesel fuel?" She paused, taking a step closer, tapping her manicured finger against Julian's chest. "We handled your mother 4 years ago, didn't we?" Victoria whispered. My heart stopped beating. The air froze in my lungs. My fingers tightened around the wooden rafter in the dark loft until my knuckles turned white as bone. Julian went rigid. "Don't talk about that, Victoria. Why not?" Victoria sneered softly. "You were drowning in $200,000 of college gambling debt back then, Julian. Who was the one who told you to look at her life insurance policy?" Who was the one who talked to the attending physician at the Denver hospice and convinced you to sign the DNR order and pull her respiratory support 4 weeks early? Julian pulled back, his face turning the color of chalk under the flashlight beam. I didn't pull it. The doctor said she was suffering. The doctor said what we paid him to say. Victoria hissed coldly. That $400,000 insurance payout was what cleared your debts and bought your first buy-in share at Vance and Sterling. You didn't weep over your mother's grave. Julian, you used her death to buy your first tailored suit, so don't play the saint with me now. Chloe stepped up beside her husband, wrapping her tracer-stained hands around his arm, looking into his pale face. Mother is right, Julian, Chloe said, her voice smooth, poisonous, and deadly. If Arthur becomes a problem with this land, we don't fight him in court. We use the medical records from your mother's final weeks. We file an emergency petition with the county magistrate, declare that Arthur has developed severe vascular dementia from 30 years of industrial toxin exposure, and place him under a mandatory state conservatorship. She smiled, a small, wicked, beautiful smile. Once he's locked inside a private memory care facility in Colorado Springs, he loses all legal standing. We take full control of the 200 acres, close the $45 million data center deal with the state, pay off the bank, and your father spends the rest of his quiet little life staring out a window in a locked room. Up in the dark loft, 3 feet above their heads, I sat completely still. My breath didn't catch. My hands didn't shake. The pain that had been living inside my chest since the night Mary died, the quiet, aching grief that had kept me awake for 4 long years, didn't hurt anymore. It evaporated, replaced by a cold, pure, terrifying clarity. They hadn't just insulted my work boots. They hadn't just thrown away my late wife's quilt. They had killed Mary 4 weeks before her time for $400,000 of blood money, and now they were planning to lock me in an asylum to steal the land I had bled for. Down below, Julian let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked at his hands that were completely covered in the invisible chemical tracer, and nodded slowly. All right, Julian whispered, his voice stripped of every last shred of humanity. We do it. Call the private medical evaluator in Colorado Springs tomorrow morning. Good, Victoria said, turning toward the door. Let's get out of this filthy dump. I listened to their footsteps retreat across the shop floor. I heard the front gate creak open, then slam shut. I heard the heavy roar of Victoria's Range Rover engine start up in the alley and speed away into the night. I sat in the dark loft for 5 full minutes in complete, absolute silence. Then I reached down, tapped my phone screen, and ended the recording, the audio file. 18 minutes and 42 seconds of crystal clear, unedited audio containing a full confession to fraud, conspiracy, insurance murder, and elder abuse, was automatically encrypted and uploaded to Sarah Jenkins' secure server in Denver. I climbed down the wooden ladder, stepped into my quiet office, and stood before Mary's photograph. I picked up the brass frame, wiped a microscopic speck of dust off the glass with the sleeve of my Carhartt jacket, and pressed my thumb gently against her face. Mary, I whispered to the quiet room, my voice low, heavy, and unbreakable as forged iron. They think they own the mountain, but they forgot that the mountain was built out of iron, and iron never bends. I walked out to my truck, shifted into drive, and pulled out onto Highway 50 toward Denver. Tomorrow was Friday, the morning of the Winter Investor Gala at the St. Regis Aspen, the day the debt came due, and I was going to be there to collect every single cent. Friday evening in Aspen arrived under a pale, diamond-hard sky. The mountain blizzard that had blinded the valley 48 hours ago had finally broken, leaving behind a frozen, silent world wrapped in 3 feet of fresh white snow. Up on the slopes, the pines stood like black spears against the twilight. But inside the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Aspen, the heat was suffocating, thick with expensive perfume, roasted rack of lamb, and the quiet, arrogant laughter of Colorado's ruling elite. 400 people had gathered for the annual Winter Heritage Gala. It was the premier event of the season, a sea of black tuxedos, silk evening gowns, gold watches, and champagne glasses gleaming under 5 massive crystal chandeliers. Standing on the elevated mahogany stage at the front of the hall were Julian and Chloe. Julian looked every bit the rising star of Wall Street West. He wore a $6,000 Tom Ford tuxedo, his blonde hair slicked back with Italian pomade, a gold Rolex gleaming on his left wrist. Standing beside him was Chloe, wrapped in a shimmering silver sequins dress that clung to her body like liquid ice, her diamond necklace catching every beam of light. Beside them stood Victoria Montgomery, holding a glass of vintage Dom Perignon, her sharp, bony face glowing with triumphant arrogance. They were 3 minutes away from announcing the cornerstone achievement of their careers, a $50 million merger between Vance and Sterling Venture Capital and the Montgomery Luxury Real Estate Group. To the press, the politicians, and the bankers in that room, it was the ultimate union of old Denver real estate royalty and high-tech venture capital. Julian stepped up to the brass podium, tapping the microphone softly. The room went quiet, 400 heads turning toward the stage. Distinguished guests, Mayor Hancock, members of the press. Julian began, his voice smooth, resonant, rehearsed to absolute perfection. Tonight we don't just celebrate wealth, we celebrate vision. We celebrate the courage to leave behind the antiquated, rusting relics of the past and step boldly into a new era of global luxury and financial dominance. He raised his glass, smiling down at Chloe, who blew him a small kiss from the side of the podium. For too long, this state has been weighed down by the slow, outdated thinking of an older generation, people who clung to dirt, iron, and sweat because they lacked the imagination to build something greater. Julian continued, his voice taking on an edge of sharp, subtle mockery. Tonight, Vance & Sterling officially acquires $50 million in prime mountain real estate assets, securing our place as the largest independent firm in the Rocky Mountain region. Applause erupted across the ballroom. Photographers from the Denver Post and Aspen Life magazine stepped forward, their flashbulbs popping in blinding white bursts. Julian leaned over the podium, taking a gold Mont Blanc pen from his breast pocket, preparing to sign the ceremonial merger documents laid out on a velvet table before him. Then the heavy double doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open. The sound didn't make a crash. It was a heavy, deliberate, resounding thud that echoed off the vaulted ceiling and cut through the applause like a blade. 400 people turned around. Stepping through the threshold was a man who did not belong to the fragile, artificial world of Aspen High society. It was me. I wasn't wearing my faded Carhartt duck canvas coat. I wasn't wearing my oil-stained work boots or my Stetson hat. I was wearing a bespoke, midnight navy three-piece suit cut from heavy English wool, tailored to fit my broad 64-year-old shoulders with absolute precision. Beneath it was a crisp white Sea Island cotton shirt and a dark silk tie fastened with a simple solid gold tie bar, the uniform of the chairman and sole trustee of the Mary Vance Trust. My gray hair was neatly trimmed, my beard brushed, my posture straight as a steel girder. I didn't look like an old welder from Pueblo. I looked like a quiet, ancient judgment walking into a room full of children. Walking half a step behind my left shoulder was Sarah Jenkins, carrying a thick leather briefcase, her dark eyes sharp and cold as glacier ice. And walking behind Sarah were 6 men in dark suit jackets and blue ties. On their lapels glinted the gold shields of the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, flanked by 2 armed agents from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division and Deputy Sheriff Ray Castillo from Pitkin County. The grand ballroom went dead silent. The applause died in an instant. The sound of 400 people catching their breath hung in the air like frost. Julian froze on stage. His hand remained suspended 3 inches above the velvet table, the gold Mont Blanc pen hovering over the paper. His face drained of color so fast it looked as if every drop of blood in his body had been sucked out through his toes. Chloe stepped forward, her silver stilettos clicking against the stage, her red lips curling into an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. "What is the meaning of this?" Chloe shouted, her voice echoing off the high walls, shrill and hysterical. "Who let this man in here? Security! Security! Get this crazy old welder out of our gala! He's trespassing!" 2 private hotel security guards in black blazers stepped toward me. Special Agent Marcus Cole of the FBI, holding a federal badge in his right hand, stepped in front of them, flicking his badge open. "Stand down," Agent Cole said, his voice flat, icy, and carrying the absolute authority of the United States government. Federal officers executing a court-ordered warrant. Anyone attempting to interfere will be arrested immediately for obstruction of justice. The security guards took 2 fast steps backward, holding their hands in the air. I walked down the central aisle of the ballroom. The elite of Denver and Aspen parted before me like dry leaves in an autumn wind. My leather shoes clicked against the hardwood floor with a steady, unhurried rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. I stopped 20 feet from the stage, resting my heavy, calloused hands on the top of my cane, looking up at my son. "Hello, Julian," I said softly. My voice wasn't raised, but in that silent hall it carried to every ear. "You told me 35 years of my life weren't worth $1. You told me to go sleep on a concrete floor in a storage room. I came to tell you, the bill for 35 years just came due." Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, opening her leather briefcase, pulling out a thick sheaf of legal documents bound in red tape. She didn't look at Julian. She looked directly at the court reporter and the journalists standing near the stage. "I am Sarah Jenkins, legal counsel to Arthur L. Vance, chairman of the Mary Vance Trust," Sarah announced, her voice ringing out like a brass bell. "I am serving formal notice of an emergency federal injunction issued 3 hours ago by the United States District Court for the District of Colorado." Julian's partner, a tall man in a gray tuxedo, rushed down the stage steps, his hands shaking. "Injunction? On what grounds?" "Vance & Sterling is a private solvent firm. Grounds of mass financial fraud, grand larceny, and corporate identity theft," Sarah said coldly. She pulled the first document from her folder and held it up. First National Bank of Colorado has officially voided the $2.2 million commercial line of credit executed by Chloe Montgomery Vance. The signature of Arthur L. Vance was verified as a fraudulent forgery by 3 independent forensic handwriting analysts at 2 o'clock today. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Furthermore, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. Under Section 402 of the Limited Partnership Agreement, the Mary Vance Trust, which holds 40% of all voting capital in Vance and Sterling, has officially revoked all executive authority from Julian Vance. As of 6 minutes ago, the assets of Vance and Sterling are frozen under federal receivership. Julian dropped his Mont Blanc pen. It rolled off the velvet table, falling off the stage and landing at my feet with a quiet clack. "No," Julian whispered, his hands clutching the edges of the podium. "No, that's impossible. My father is a welder. He doesn't own the trust. The trust belongs to an offshore fund." "The trust belongs to your mother, Julian," I said, my voice quiet, deep, and vibrating with an ancient grief. "The money you thought came from foreign investors was earned by my hands, working midnight shifts in the Pueblo rail yards while your mother was dying. I put it in her name so you would be protected, and you used her name to build a house of cards." Chloe screamed, a sharp, feral sound of pure, desperate rage. She grabbed Julian's arm, her diamond-encrusted fingers digging into his tuxedo jacket. "He's lying. He's an old man with dementia." Chloe shrieked, looking wildly at the crowd, her face contorted into an ugly mask. "Look at him. He's trying to ruin us because we wouldn't give him money. He's senile. We have medical records." Agent Cole stepped onto the stage. He didn't argue. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, high-powered ultraviolet blacklight torch. "Chloe Montgomery Vance, Julian Vance, Victoria Montgomery," Agent Cole said calmly. "Please remain still." He clicked the blacklight on. A beam of intense, deep violet light washed over the stage. What happened next made 3 women in the front row scream. The moment the UV light touched Julian's hands, his palms, wrists, and the front collar of his white silk shirt burst into a blinding, electric green radiance. It looked as if he had dipped his hands into glowing liquid emeralds. The light moved to Chloe. Her hands, her designer evening bag, and the silver sequins across her waist glowed with the exact same brilliant neon green. The light hit Victoria Montgomery. Her fingers, her mink coat cuffs, and her neck were covered in bright green chemical handprints. What is that?" Julian stammered, staring down at his hands in absolute terror, trying frantically to rub his palms against his trousers. The green light only glowed brighter. "What did you put on me?" "That is Lumamark Industrial Tracer Solution," I said quietly, looking up at him from the foot of the stage. "It is an invisible molecular chemical compound used to detect microscopic leaks in high-pressure gas mains. It doesn't wash off with soap. It doesn't rub off with cloth. It binds to human skin for 72 hours. And I painted it across my safe, my desk, and my workshop door in Pueblo last night." The crowd stared in utter horror. The photojournalists began firing their cameras repeatedly, capturing the glowing neon green hands of Aspen's elite couple under the harsh purple light. "You were caught on security infrared breaking into my workshop at 9:42 p.m., Agent Cole stated, taking out a pair of steel handcuffs. "You stole confidential property records and attempted to force an antique safe. That constitutes grand larceny and felony trespassing under Colorado law." "It's a setup," Victoria Montgomery screamed, her voice cracking as she backed away toward the rear curtain. "My daughter had nothing to do with this. This old peasant staged the whole thing." Sarah Jenkins turned to the audio technician standing near the house sound mixing board at the side of the ballroom. She gave a single, quiet nod. The technician hit a switch on his console. A sharp audio tone sounded over the massive St. Regis surround sound speakers. The audio system built to play classical symphonies for Aspen's nobility. Then came the voice. It wasn't a recording from a phone speaker. It was crystal clear, high-definition digital audio, amplified through 40,000 watts of concert speakers, filling every cubic inch of the grand ballroom. "Stop being such a coward, Julian." Victoria's voice boomed through the hall, icy, arrogant, and unmistakably distinct. "Who do you think a judge in Aspen is going to believe? You, a managing partner, or an old man who smells like diesel fuel?" The crowd went dead still. Victoria froze, her face turning the color of wet ash. The recording played on, unyielding, brutal, relentless. "We handled your mother 4 years ago, didn't we?" Victoria's recorded voice sneered through the speakers. "Who was the one who talked to the attending physician at the Denver hospice and convinced you to sign the DNR order and pull her respiratory support 4 weeks early? That $400,000 insurance payout was what cleared your debts. You didn't weep over your mother's grave, Julian. You used her death to buy your first tailored suit." A loud, collective gasp echoed through the room. 2 women in the audience covered their mouths, tears streaming down their faces. Mayor Hancock turned his back on the stage, his face dark with absolute disgust. Then came Chloe's recorded voice, loud, toxic, and ringing clear over the sound system. If Arthur becomes a problem with this land, we file an emergency petition. Declare that Arthur has developed severe vascular dementia. Once he's locked inside a private memory care facility, he loses all legal standing. We take full control of the 200 acres, close the $45 million data center deal, and your father spends the rest of his quiet little life staring out a window in a locked room. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was terrifying. It was a silence so heavy, so absolute, that you could hear the quiet hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. Julian collapsed to his knees right there on the stage. His midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo crumpled onto the wood. He buried his glowing green face in his glowing green hands, weeping, a dry, horrible, gagging sound of a man who has watched his entire life burn to dust in front of 400 people he sought to impress. Chloe, completely unhinged by panic, pulled her diamond-encrusted iPhone from her silver clutch. Her mind, warped by years of living on social media validation, broke entirely under the pressure. She hit the red button, going live on TikTok to her 80,000 followers. "Help us!" Chloe shrieked into the camera, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick black streaks, her face glowing neon green under the blacklight. "We are being attacked by an abusive old man and corrupt federal agents in Aspen. He's trying to steal our company. Share this stream, share it right now." She held the phone up, panning the camera across the stage, but the camera didn't capture a victim. 80,000 live viewers. A number that rapidly ballooned to 300,000 within 2 minutes as the stream went viral across the internet. Didn't see a rich socialite being oppressed. They saw 2 FBI agents step forward, grab Chloe's arms, pull her hands behind her silver dress, and snap steel handcuffs around her glowing wrists. They saw the IRS investigators hand Julian a federal indictment for bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. They saw Victoria Montgomery being led off the stage by Pitkin County deputies, screaming profanities at the press as flashbulbs burst in her face. The chat on Chloe's livestream exploded into a blinding waterfall of text. "Is that the guy's mother they killed for insurance? Look at her hands glowing green, caught red-handed. The old man built everything and they tried to lock him in an asylum. Lock them up forever." Agent Cole took the phone from Chloe's trembling, handcuffed fingers, looked directly into the camera lens, and said 4 simple words: "Stream ended. Fraud terminated." He clicked the screen off. The 3 of them were led down the stage steps, past the 400 guests who stood in stony, disgusted silence. Not a single friend stepped forward. Not a single associate offered a hand. As Julian was led past me, his leather shoes dragging along the floor, he stopped. He looked up at me through his swollen, tear-streaked eyes, his chest heaving, his voice stripping down to the terrified 6-year-old boy he used to be. "Dad!" Julian sobbed, his voice cracking into pieces. "Dad, please, don't let them take me. Please, Dad, I'm your son." I stood there in my dark suit, resting my hands on my cane, looking down at him. My chest didn't tighten, my hands didn't shake. The ache of 35 years of sacrifice sat quietly inside me, settled, calm, and finished. "You were my son, Julian," I said softly, my voice steady as an anvil. "But the boy I raised died the day you put a price tag on your mother's breath. Go with the officers." He was pulled away into the freezing Aspen night. The red and blue emergency lights of 4 police cruisers flashing against the tall glass windows of the St. Regis, casting long bloody shadows across the snow 3 months later. The Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, Colorado. The spring sun was just beginning to melt the snow off the roof of the old stone building. Inside courtroom 3B, the air was quiet, smelling of floor wax, old leather law books, and cedar wood. Julian stood at the defense table, wearing a plain orange Department of Corrections jumpsuit. His hair was cropped short, his face thin, his eyes sunken and hollow. He had spent 90 days in federal remand awaiting sentencing after pleading guilty to federal wire fraud, bank larceny, and conspiracy. Beside him stood Chloe and Victoria, both wearing matching orange scrubs, their former glamour completely stripped away, looking like thin, frightened ghosts. The federal judge, a gray-haired woman named Honorable Beatrice Miller, looked down over her glasses at the pre-sentencing report. "Julian Vance," Judge Miller said, her voice dry and unyielding. "Under the federal sentencing guidelines, your conviction carries a mandatory statutory sentence of 12 to 15 years in a Class 4 federal penitentiary. Your actions represent the absolute worst of human greed, a systematic attempt to destroy your own father for financial gain." She paused, turning a page. "However, this court has received an extraordinary petition filed by the victim in this case, Mr. Arthur Vance." Julian raised his head slowly, his hollow eyes turning toward the front row of the gallery where I sat beside Sarah Jenkins. Judge Miller looked at me. "Mr. Vance, you have requested a downward departure from the guidelines for your son. Do you wish to address the court?" I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my jacket, and stepped up to the podium. "I do, Your Honor," I said. My voice was deep, gravelly, carrying the quiet weight of a man who has spent his entire life working outdoors. I looked at Julian. He didn't look away this time. He looked at me with a profound, crushing shame that no prison sentence could ever manufacture. "Your Honor," I said, looking up at the bench, "I am not asking for a pardon. I am not asking you to wipe his record clean. A man who does not pay for his mistakes will only grow up to make bigger ones." I paused, letting my hands rest flat against the wooden podium. Julian spent 10 years running away from hard work. He spent 10 years believing that a man's worth is measured by the car he drives, the brand of his suit, and the size of his bank account. Sending him to sit in a federal cell for 15 years will only teach him how to be a better criminal. I turned to face my son directly. "I have used my position as the primary shareholder of the restructured firm to request an alternative sentence, subject to your Honor's approval," I continued. 300 hours of mandatory, uncompensated physical labor with the Pueblo Public Works Department, cleaning frozen drainage ditches, repairing highway guardrails in July heat, and shoveling coal slag from the municipal furnaces. A quiet murmur went through the courtroom. "I want him to learn what a gallon of sweat actually tastes like," I said softly. "I want him to feel his hands blister, his back ache, and his feet burn until he understands that the food on his table was bought with someone else's blood." I pulled a single blue document from my inner pocket and placed it on the court clerk's desk. "Furthermore, Your Honor, I am officially dissolving the commercial assets of the Mary Vance Trust. $10 million from the sale of the Pueblo data center land has been transferred into a permanent, irrevocable educational endowment, the Mary Vance Vocational Scholarship Fund. I looked Julian straight in the eyes. "It will provide full college and trade school tuition for 200 children of low-income welders, mechanics, and ironworkers across Colorado," I said, my voice unbroken. "Neither Julian nor Chloe, nor any member of their estate will ever hold a single dollar of administrative control over that fund. It belongs to the children of honest men." Julian's shoulders began to shake. He bowed his head, resting his forehead against the defense table, weeping quietly, uncontrollable tears dropping onto the polished wood. I walked up to the edge of the defense table, stood 2 feet from my son, and looked down at him one last time. "Get to work, Julian," I said, my voice low, stern, but carrying a thread of quiet, sorrowful mercy. "Learn how to sweat before you learn how to spend. Learn how to be a father to your children, so you never become a parasite on mine." I turned my back on the defense table, took my Stetson hat from the bench, and walked out of the courtroom into the bright Colorado sun. The drive back to Pueblo was quiet. The spring air blowing through the open window of my old Ford truck smelled of wet earth, green clover, and melting snow off the Spanish peaks. I pulled into the yard of Vance Ironworks at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The heavy chain-link gates were open. The afternoon sun hit the corrugated metal roof of the shop, turning the old iron sign, the 2 crossed hammers over the anvil, into a bright golden beacon against the blue sky. I walked into the shop, took off my tailored suit jacket, hung it neatly on a wooden peg near the door, and pulled on my old faded brown Carhartt canvas coat. I stepped up to the gas forge, opened the valve, and struck a match. Foosh, the blue and orange flame roared to life inside the brick hearth, casting a deep, warm, amber light across the anvil, the heavy hammers, and the iron bars stacked along the wall. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my grandfather's Illinois gold pocket watch. It wasn't crushed anymore. Over the past 3 months, I had taken every tiny gold gear, every bent hand, and every fragment of porcelain that I had gathered off the marble floor in Aspen, and I had sent them to a master watchmaker in Boston. The porcelain face was restored, white and clean. The gold case was polished, gleaming under the forge light, and inside, the tiny mechanical heart was ticking again. Tick, 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 steady, quiet, and true as the river. I set the watch down gently on the flat wooden surface of my desk, right beside Mary's photograph. I picked up my 12-pound sledgehammer, resting the heavy steel head against the face of the anvil, feeling the cool, solid weight of the iron in my hands. The ultimate payback philosophy direct monologue. I am a revenge dad. To the world out there, that word sounds like anger. It sounds like a man raising his voice, smashing furniture, and burning down everything in his path out of pure bitter hatred. But true revenge, true payback, is never built on anger. Anger is weak. Anger is a fire that burns up the house just to destroy a single termite. True payback is the quiet, unyielding restoration of order, justice, and self-respect. It is the willingness to stand in the storm, keep your mouth shut, write down every debt in the ledger of your mind, and wait until the cold wind blows the fake smiles away. It is teaching ungrateful children a lesson they can never unlearn, that the sweat of an old man is not a resource for them to drain, that a father's sacrifice is not a weakness to be exploited, and that love, true, unconditional love, does not mean submission to wickedness. God does not ask an old man to hand the work of his life over to people who will burn it for pleasure. He asks us to be faithful stewards of what we have built with our blood, and the most faithful, loving thing I ever did for my son was to refuse to hand the keys of my life to a boy who never once stopped to ask how much blood it took to forge them. that is family justice. That is the only kind of revenge dad I ever wanted to be. If this story stayed with you tonight, if it reminded you of the quiet strength of your own father or the hard work you've put into building a life for your family, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with a man who needs to stand tall tonight, and leave a comment down below with your thoughts. Thank you for walking with me through the storm, and thank you for staying with Dad's ultimate payback until the very last word. Until next time, keep your hands clean, your words strong, and your fire burning bright.